big, glamorous sport, far, far more ahead of Formula One car racing, because the physical size of the craft, it's mind-blowing for the public when they actually can see these massive boats running. And of course see them in the pits, see them on parades through the towns. Whereas if you compare a Formula One car, they're all lookalikes, just different colours. But boats have different shapes, monos, catamarans, trimarans. So it's much more interesting, much more colourful, much more spectacular.
There's no doubt about it, it is more spectacular than car racing. You've got all the boats splashing, all the water coming out of them. And some of the neck-and-neck racing is fantastic in offshore.
I mean, the sport has changed. Speeds are very different. You know, if you don't run fast, you are way behind. You go over the 110, 115 miles limit, you know, in the sea, it takes, I would say, a little bit of guts too, because it's not as precise as it can be in car driving. In car, you have a constant and steady condition of the road, which is always the same. Turns are always there. They are very predictable, you know. The sea is unfortunately never predictable.
Boats are really going fast now. I mean, you see high speeds that you never saw 5 years ago, 3 years ago, or not even last year. There's a whole bunch of brand new boats. There's a lot of people into offshore racing now, and it's a sport right now that is blooming. You know, if anybody gets into it now, it's a sport that's going to grow and get bigger and bigger, and eventually you end up being like Formula One car racing.
Just got an duplicate list. Really? Now that doesn't mean a damn thing.
You don't need a lifeboat now, do you?
Don't you?
No.
Some places they say
you only need three smoke, 6 rocket.
So we don't need 3 of these? Thank God. So we need 4 of these then?
3 smoke, all you need is 3 orange smoke and 6 rocket.
So we don't need these at all?
No.
None of these?
Both may jump level now.
Thank God for that. I've never known anything like this, you know. We've carried this lot the whole season.
Yeah. And every race we went to,
I've never
you need
seen
this,
anyone with this many big flares.
You don't need torches, you don't need a lifebuoy.
You don't need torches?
You don't need a lifebuoy.
I mean, I can't remember the last time I used a torch.
There's a dye marker in the back pocket here.
Because they help you float, even when they're not inflated.
As you've seen out there, it looks pretty good. But of course it's not quite as good out in the open water as it is in the shelter of the Little Russell here. The wind southeast to south, but it is following the land. In other words, on the south coast there's a degree of southwestern as it comes round St Martin's Point. This afternoon we could well get onshore breezes due to the heat over the land, but we're not really expecting force 3, certainly not any more than that. The swell is long and low from the west, probably about 1.5 meters, long and low. The sea, slight waves up to about 1 meter, which of course could increase a little bit this afternoon if the wind does get up.
Pull the stern round! Pull it round! Pull it! Pull it! Now pull it that way. Right. We cannot lift it over
If it's rough, obviously it's a lot down to guts because you can't run at 120 miles an hour if it's rough. If it's calm, it's just a case of leaving it there, setting it up, and just running, you know, for the finish. And it doesn't take a lot of guts. You just got to sit there and let her eat. I try and work closely with the guys who are working on the boat. You know, when we come back, we always have a discussion on how the boat was running, how Vincenzo felt with the boat. You know, anything we've got to change, and we try and change it. But obviously, once you're into a season, you're limited on time as to what you can do. And due to the fact we sunk the first boat, we haven't had a lot of time to set up this boat. But it's really coming together now. And every time we go out there, we're feeling better together as a team, and I think that's good.
These engines are V12. They're fuel injected, electronic ignition, double overhead camshaft engine for those who are interested in the technicalities. The horsepower is about 825 horsepower each. We're driving through Daytona gearboxes and then down through Mercury Z drives and running 4-bladed stainless steel cleaver propellers. A new Class 1 boat from the drawing board, fully fitted with a hydraulic tilting rig and a race stable, mobile race stable, and a race stable back at home, complete with spare engines, drives, props, etc., etc. The whole package, you're in the order of £500,000 sterling.
The big thing is that we're getting very, very sophisticated in our technology now, and our latest boats are up into aircraft technology as far as... In fact, I've taken on 2 new hands in the aluminium works who are both aircraft constructors. I have to say that when we get the speeds up, we've got to look very seriously at the safety angle. We're building the safety angle up on the boats. That definitely is getting better. There's really no problems in that respect. But we need the safety on the water as well. And in America, they're much more advanced with us, and they've got helicopters with paramedics in them behind each boat. So they're able to drop persons on board who can help the situation. We've got to look at that in this country. I think now the sport has got to a situation where it cannot develop anymore. Speeds cannot develop anymore unless we do have safety built up all the way around.
The 101 SDA, it's a fairly complicated boat, you know. It took us quite a while to get it running well. We have 4 engines in it, but instead of coming out with 4 drives, you know, we go into the 4 engines, you know, 2 to 2 in a pair. They go into a drop box. From a drop box, they go into a gearbox, and on a gearbox, they go into the drive. We have, the engines are 2.9 liter, 12-cylinder boxer engines, turbo, 4 valves, 2 turbines per engine. And as you know, I mean, all turbo engines have very little torque on low RPMs. So we needed gearboxes to get on a plane. If not, we would never get on a plane.
I think that Guernsey Tourism have done such a fantastic job for me to come over from Jersey and try and help generate as much publicity as possible. It's good. Steve is a very good friend of mine, and it's good for me to come here and support him. I was also threatened with the chance of riding in the boat, which is an attraction on its own. What I want is a piece of rope to serve around your neck, so every now and again I pull the rope. I got it. Once we were going that way, then the front was right up like this, and it came down. I reacted well. Right. He was screaming at me to turn, and I was sort of going, oh, don't like it. And I need the whole island to turn round almost.
Yeah, well, you should come with us yesterday.
Oh yeah, I'd have been all right yesterday. I found it very frightening. A couple of times he gave me a fairly interesting ride going back out towards the end of the island, and the boat came right up, and you heard him throttle off, and as it came down, it was quite surprising how I could react to the water. It just sort of, it was a natural instinct, really. It was good. I mean, it was a little bit frightening, but I enjoyed it.
I happen to like to go places that have history, beautiful stores, or beautiful scenery. Where do you go after Monte Carlo? I mean, this is the ultimate venue, I think. I grew up with all the legends. The Gar Wood was alive when I met him. I flew in his amphibian with him. The late Don Arno, Carl Kiefer, Vincenzo Balestreri, which incidentally lives right across from my hotel in Monte Carlo, and I'm having dinner with him tonight. Two-time world champion. The Gardner brothers from England, Tommy Sopwith, and all these legends. I grew up with them. And I said, you know, God, if I don't write this, nobody's going to. And it took me 12 years. In the 60s, we were doing, we got up around 70, 75 miles an hour. We used basically automobile engines, Chryslers, Cadillacs, and modified them somewhat for marine use. And we had them in first sport fishing boats. And then in about the mid-60s, people like Thunderbird in the United States, and then the English and the Italians got into it, and they begin to develop boats that were high-performance offshore boats. We were using 500 horsepower gasoline engines, and then in the 60s we brought in the diesels, which we allowed them 2-to-1 displacement, which has now become quite a controversy with Fabio Buzzi, who has been totally all but unbeatable up until very recently with his 4 diesel C-Tech diesel engines. And we went into various types of drives in 1962. Actually, before that, Jim Wynn, the American, invented the modern concept of the so-called stern drive or out drive. And then that patent was later obtained by Mercouser, the late Carl Kiefer, who was an awesome competitor. You never beat him twice. And that became the Mercouser outdrive or stern drive. And that made offshore boats much less vulnerable to floating debris. They could hit things theoretically and bounce up and not destroy them. And they could run in shallow water if they got caught in shallow water. And look, at those days you have to keep in mind we were offshore racing. Unfortunately, the Europeans began to pick up the American trend of running in super light boats along the coast, which doesn't mean that makes them any less heroic. If you're going 100 miles an hour in a boat, you've got to be no cowards in those boats. But the Monohull is still the ideal boat for big seas. The Catamaran can, up to 6 foot seas, the Catamaran runs a lot better than you think it can, as the English Cougars have proven. But I think that we have to divide these boats into offshore and inshore.
Under exceptional, conditions of flat waters, we are getting very close to the speed record of powerboat. I mean, the boat, under perfect conditions with the 4 engines, will go over 130 miles, really. Then again, as I said, you are always racing in the sea, and to reach that kind of speed, you have to have total flat water. The slightest wave will throw you in the air. The driver just drives, really. I work the clutches, the gears, trims and flaps. But it is like in a car. I mean, except that, the switching of the gears is with a switch. You have a pneumatic switch instead of having a lever, just because of distance. Leverage system would be complicated. But you really do the same operation as in a car. You pull the gas down, you put the clutch in, you shift, you release the clutch and you give gas again, exactly like in a normal car. And it works great.
You gotta really trim the boat right, have the attitude of the boat right, drives, make sure they're in the right spot, the tabs on the right spot, throttle the boat, which is very important, otherwise you won't finish a race because you'll blow an engine or you'll blow a drive. And you gotta keep track of all the gauges, make sure that everything's running in order, that the temperature of the motors are fine, and it's a lot going through your mind. Usually it's safer if you're on a B-bottom, because you go out, you get the feel of the course, you guys adjust to each other, and you know what to expect with the other person as a driver. So when you get yourself in a cat that it's also enclosed and visibility is kind of difficult to see, you can more or less know what the other one's thinking at the same time. You really don't have to be screaming at each other, turn, or right or left. You guys know what you're doing.
the driver of the boat. In our boat we are 4 people. I have to, for example, to try in the jump on the wave to take the boat on the right position, not to go on the left or on the right, and especially to balance the boat, because it's very important not to go, for example, with the front of the boat in the wave, because it's very dangerous when you go into the wave. And after there is the throttleman, that I think is the most important rule, because the throttleman is the person that determines the power of the engine. So he have to decide when go with the throttle and when go back. So my life in his hands. The other 2 people in my back, I have my brother that is the navigator, and he have to determine the route, rota, and he make the time from one buoy to the other. And we have 4 people, 4th person, that is the technique, that is very important, because he has under his eyes all the instruments, so he can in any time he can see all the temperature of the oil, of the water, all the levels, and so it can tell us if the engine runs well or not.
The Monohull, of which today we use all V-bottoms, cuts through the water better. It takes a lot of power to get it through the water. And when it comes down from a brutal sea, in what we call tripping, it gets out of the water and the back end catches and it slams it. Okay, when a V slams, it parts the water. It can go under. I've seen them nosedive, but it parts the water and the impact's taken on the fanny end of the boat. So it can take a tremendous beating. Now on a catamaran, the stability is the liability. See, the seas are changing all the time. But a monohull has got the bow up so high that it can take at 10-foot 15 sea and still have a survival attitude. A catamaran comes out and is supposed to fly like an airplane. So okay, a catamaran comes off of a crest, trips, hits it, and it tends to duck its nose down, and then it spears into the next sea and buries itself at 100 miles an hour. It does incredible damage, wipes out, it'll kill a man. I mean, if it hits you just right, we're seeing what happens. So we haven't figured a way to have these catamarans. It's impossible, I believe, because unless you build a monstrous catamaran that's 100 or 200 feet long, you're still going to have that proclivity for burying the nose in stuffing. And then, you see, the late James Beard said, he told me before he died a few years ago, that 125 miles an hour was the blowover point. Technically, the ideal is not the right word, but the proper blowover of a catamaran is into the wind, a slow roll, upside down, backwards. Now, if you see those boats out there, 80% of them are death traps. Because if you don't have a back to your canopy, then you act as a giant ice cream scoop, and it will destroy the lungs, the brain, the back. I mean, so they're all just looking to be killed. Number one, you have to have an armored fuselage, what I call it. You have to have like a fighter plane fuselage, and you have to have a roll bar and a spine to it, so you can hit upside down and skid. And then you can do 150 miles an hour and never even be injured. And then we have other problems. We leave the canopy open. We're now having problems with some of these canopies are absolutely disintegrating. They will break, especially if you take the top out and lose the integrity, and then you leave the back open. You see. And another thing I see a lot of that. I've looked through thousands of slides all the time, and if you look in your film, you'll see these guys that think they're bulletproof in their beautiful canopy with their orange helmet, and the helmet is sticking about like this. Here's a canopy. Now the human neck will stretch to 6 inches in an accident. That means that 6 inches extension, where does that put his face? Take his head off, cut him right in half. So you have to have a minimum of, I would say, a foot underneath the canopy. We have to have 30 inches in front of you, so you don't hit the canopy in the crash, you see. These are all things that can handle.
Mandy was saying 3 boats went down. Fresh and clean stuff that we carried on. Don't know about Syre crew, don't know about Pino de Pino. Kaziragi's boat was, the cockpit was underwater, like Baguta in Nice.
I dived in to see if I could, do anything. Initially, I went down on the wrong side of the boat because obviously I don't know which side of the boat Stefan is. Dove as far down as I could and didn't see anything. Came up because I thought he may have gone forward, might have a problem getting out, but might be able to hold his breath for a few minutes or whatever. And I went down again on that side because I didn't quite get long enough to look, and I saw, as I came up on the other side, I saw Stefano was out of the boat, but was attached by some sort of, I think it was a safety kill switch cord or something. Then I swam over to that side, but the boat was sinking, and I'd pretty much used all my breath up, and I tried to get down there, couldn't quite get to it. And by then a diver turned up, and, managed to release him.
There's a lot of importance placed on safety, to the point where some people have even complained that we worry about it too much. In the U.S., you're seeing very few boats in the UIM class that don't have canopies. If the boat can go over 65 miles an hour, they're putting canopies on them. Some boats have escape hatches on the bottom or on the in different ends, so you can actually go up into the boat and down, and they have emergency lighting inside that comes on, glows in the underwater, so you know there's the escape hatch. There's a lot of technical stuff built into the boats in America. It's a lot more expensive to put that in a boat, but we try to keep our racers racing with us as long as we can.
We've had some blood pressure problems that were a little high. We've got a set of standards that if they don't meet these blood pressure problems, we go lay them down, let them relax. A lot of it's due to pre-race anxiety. We'll monitor them all year long. If we find out they've got a hypertension problem, we suggest that they see their physician, submit letters to us that they're being treated for high blood pressure. It's just a means of trying to take care of them, A lot of times, a lot of them won't go out and get a blood pressure, but here, every race, they know they're going to get one, and we can find baseline problems.
Come on! We thought that sealed cockpits have to be the safest way to go. We've watched some of the racers that flipped the boats over and watched some of the accidents, and we've determined that this offers maximum protection with a minimum amount of trouble. We have a 5-point harness. We have spare air that gives us about 3 to 5 minutes of air. And we practice about the same egress procedures that they would be in a helicopter or a fighter if it went under. We wait till all the motion stops, put the air in our mouth, wait till we fill up with a little water and we get out. They tell us they'll be able to get to us anywhere on the course within 2 minutes. By 2 minutes, we ought to be upside down. We ought to be getting out ourselves. If, in fact, they have to get us out, they tell us we'll be out in less than 4 minutes. They have an outside hatch that they can just pop the cockpits open. If the hatch tends to be stuck because of some contortion or anything in the boat, there's some D-ring pins that can be pulled off, and then the hinges can be popped open. And we've told them in the last resort, take a big crowbar and tear the darn things off.
Sometimes you got to drive, up to 1,800 miles from one race site to the other. So your first concern is making sure your truck and your equipment and your trailer is ready. Then as soon as that's taken care of, your next main concern is getting the boat itself ready. For instance, on this boat, we have to go up to Mercury's Lake X up in Orlando, Florida, pick up the boat. We had to wait to make sure that everything was on there and secure. As far as the boat being ready, your next step is to drive up from Orlando down here to Key West, get the boat here, immediately clean it because all that long driving gets it all full of bugs and stuff. Right after that, you go ahead and get the boat ready. We get John or one of the mechanics and one of the inspectors to come on board, go through our motors, go through the equipment, go through all our safety stuff, make sure our kill switches are working. They go through our life jackets, our helmets, our rafts, our flares, our radar deflectors. They make sure that everything is on board, so once this boat goes in the water, there is no headaches, nothing that was forgotten. Heaven forbid, while you're out there, there's any kind of an accident. You want to make sure before this thing goes in the water that everything is taken care of and inspected. Safety for us, safety for the guys that are running the race, and you want to go out there and only worry about racing and the competition. You don't want to have any minor details or anything that was left that might create a hazard out there.
Inside boats such as Team Ferrari, which has canopies, the racers carry air tanks and first aid kits and flotation devices, etc., so that should anything happen where they're in the canopy, they can be okay for an extra 20-30 minutes with air. They don't have to worry about suffocating or drowning or stuff. Plus the boat is built with buoyancy in it so it will not sink. When a boat is in an accident, the first thing that happens is the stern end of the boat, the transom goes down, and since the racers sit on that end, they go into the water and they usually are trapped there. This boat has got the buoyancy to bring it back up.
We've had 2 cases where the race boats have hit the helicopter. Down there, and I hit one in California one year. Actually hit the skid of the helicopter. Well, we had 54 of them over a New Jersey race back in the 70s, 54 helicopters over one race. And the people, when that occurs, there's more danger up there, a lot more than in those race boats. And but they've virtually made the sport visible without the helicopter. No, we used fixed wings back in the 60s and 70s. It did awesome work. You could do it with a fixed wing, but and the techniques that you have to use. I mean, there's an art. People don't realize there's an art. For example, you can't take a shot and go back and catch the guy. He's doing your max speed's 120 miles an hour, and he's doing 110 or 120. You can't go back and get him again. You got to get him on the cross leg. You got to somehow get over that other leg and get him coming back.
The driver's job is mainly to stay in the boat, and he's in the V-bottoms because of the oscillation and everything. They don't handle like a catamaran does. He's pretty busy with the wheel the whole time. That and trying to keep a compass heading. So that's about all the time he has to do. There's no interruptions, and he's not looking at any gauges. He's at the compass and the horizon. And the throttle guy, he has kind of more of the mechanical job, keep the trim tabs and the drives trimmed properly, and keep the engines in one piece and monitor all the gauges. So we didn't run with a navigator here because the course was kind of short, and it was good for me because I couldn't get lost. But the drivers, he just aimed the boat, and a 38, 40-foot boat is not all that easy sometimes, and especially in the rough seas, it gets tough to do that. The Super Hawaii team is running a couple of Bootsy C-Tech diesels, and they're 850 horsepower diesels or so, a lot of torque, and the RPMs are not very high, like 3,200 or something. And, amazingly dependable. We just haven't had a problem all year. I mean, change oil in them and keep on running them.
Waves weren't normally like the ocean is, where you've got a little bit of distance in between the waves, and it became more choppy. And we decided that we'd take it easy. We knew we couldn't run with the first place boat because he's so much bigger than we are. And a wave caught us and sent us up in the air, and we tipped on the stern of the boat, and it just sent us straight down into the water. Your first concern is getting out of the boat. Obviously, when you're seatbelted in with water around you, you want to get out of that situation as quickly as possible. We did that and then surveyed the damage, and definitely thought the boat was salvageable. So we fought really hard not to let it sink. The water deflected up over the canopy as well as the piece of deck that came off, and that hit the canopy as well. We do have a couple of scratches in the canopy itself, but I think for sure, without any hesitation, that the canopy saved our lives.
I have a very strong feeling against capsules. Obviously, I run with no capsules. My personal opinion is I want out of that boat if something happens. I don't want to be in it.
I mean, it's pretty exciting. I mean, for an old guy, it makes your blood pressure tick, and it gets the adrenaline flowing. So, I mean, it's something I do that I like.